Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Fort Wayne Up Close. I'm your host, JJ Foster, and it is my pleasure to join you here, I guess, in the new year, because I know it's only a week left in the new year, but I haven't seen you guys in a while, so happy new year to everyone out there in our viewership. It is my pleasure today to be joined by two of my favorite executive directors in the whole wide world. These are the dynamic duo. I have to my right here, Miss Aisha Arrington, Executive Director, CEO, Fort Wayne Urban League, and Miss Nikki Quintana, Executive Director of Metro Human Relations Divisions. Ladies, it's a pleasure having you guys on. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we get off into our discussion? What all do you guys have going on? Because you guys have turned into quite the dynamic duo.
Well, you know what? I just need that introduction every time. I like that. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I always like coming and talking to you, JJ, and being able to share things with the community. Thank you for having us today. I just would like to give a shout out that February is Black History Month. And so Monday at the Fort Wayne Urban League at 10:30 a.m., we're going to have a press conference. The mayor has signed a proclamation making John Knuckles Day, February 2nd, 2026. John Knuckles was the first African American appointed on our council, on our city council. And so we're recognizing him that day. I'd love for the community to come out to celebrate that proclamation, but also be able to view a bust of John Knuckles that the artist Hector Garcia created, and his family donated that to Fort Wayne Urban League, and we'll have that on display. So that's Monday, 10:30 a.m. Come on out to your Fort Wayne Urban League and celebrate a little history with us, recognizing John Knuckles.
All right, perfect. Excellent way of kicking off Black History Month. Nikki, what about you? What you guys have going on before we jump off into our promotion of why you guys are here?
Yeah, well, just again, thank you for having us on. We're excited to be on and being able to share our mission at Metro, as well as share what we're doing in February. So right now, the biggest projects that we're working on are February Fair Housing Series, which is happening all the month of February, which we're going to talk about, as well as our April Fair Housing Summit. So we're already starting to plan for that. We have a keynote already that we're really excited about. It's not public yet, but we're going to be putting that information out. So if everyone can stay tuned for that as well.
Okay, look, like I said, they always have things going on, as you can see. And that Fair Housing Summit has turned out to be one of our biggest events in Fort Wayne. You guys do an excellent job, and a lot of knowledge to be had, and a great time to connect with people in the housing industry at that time. So we definitely appreciate you doing that. All righty. Now, we're here to promote, as we talked about, Black History Month, and a great way to kick off what you're doing on Monday at the Housing Authority. But you guys are also going to do a 4-part series. You guys are partnering and doing a 4-part series for Black History Month, and it's called Shame of Chicago, Shame of the Nation. You know, I love that title. But tell the people exactly what is this 4-part series and what can they expect?
Yeah. So it is a 4-part series. We will be screening Shame of Chicago, Shame of a Nation, and it will be happening every Wednesday in the month of February. Starts at 5:30. The first 3 Wednesdays in the month, it'll be 5:30 to 6:30. And then the last Wednesday, which is February 25th, it will be a 2-hour session. And that particular session will also have a panel where we'll discuss the screening, each of the episodes. And the panel includes Mayor Sharon Tucker, Linda Golden with Rainey, Melissa McCown, who's the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, as well as Tamisha Fikes, who is with Midwest America Federal Credit Union. And Midwest was actually a sponsor of this event as well. And so with the screening, we're hoping that to provide awareness and education. And really through that, as people will watch, they'll learn the history of fair housing and housing discrimination in the city of Chicago, but they'll also be able to piece that together with what kind of happened nationwide and even affected Fort Wayne at that time. And how those ramifications still have implications today.
Okay. Yeah, great. And that's why I said I love that name, because again, Shame of Chicago. And a lot of people think that whatever happens in their community is just them. So, hey, that may have happened in Chicago, but that didn't happen elsewhere. So it sounds like this kind of displays and shows how Chicago kind of really was shaping the nation, or just a microcosm of what was going on everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's so much history in this. So when we think of the civil rights movement, a lot of us are educated on Jim Crow and what that lifestyle meant. But people left the South, coming to northern states like Illinois, landing in places like Chicago, looking for opportunity. But what we find when we watch a series like this is that there wasn't equal opportunity when Blacks fled the South, coming to the North, looking for housing and jobs and better education. It wasn't equal.
Gotcha. So yeah, you're right. A lot of people when they came up here from the South, we knew, like you said, there was Jim Crow laws. So segregation was the law, and everybody knew what to expect. And they came up here, and you had what they call de facto segregation, and a lot of people weren't, ready for all that. So in some of these episodes, like I look at the first episode, the color tax. What exactly is the color tax?
So basically, that first episode talks about racial zoning and how cities like Chicago created racial districts and Black individuals couldn't live in white districts. And then ultimately how that turned into, when that became illegal, how that turned into racial covenants that private owners were then putting into their property. So individuals were not able to even buy certain property. And then when that became illegal, then it was, there was redlining, right? So now we're using maps based on racism, based on certain zones being considered hazardous, where banks and the federal government at that time wouldn't even lend to Black families because they were in that redlining zone. So we were seeing in that process, we're seeing certain individuals, people of color, Black individuals, being left out of the ability to buy homes, left out of the ability to create that wealth, right? Which we know that there is a wealth gap today, which honestly started from the reality that many individuals and people of color were not able to get mortgages, because most of families' wealth usually comes from their ability to buy a home.
Gotcha. And it's funny. I love this discussion because I'm a mortgage lender now, and I've traveled. I've been at Urban League, so I know a little bit of my history facts as well too. And I just want to make sure people understand. So basically, what you guys are telling me, somebody comes to my bank and they can have an 800 credit score. Their debt to income could be at 30%, which is well within limits to get money loaned to you. They walk into a bank, very bankable, but you're telling me they couldn't live or purchase homes and where they wanted to?
No, and I mean, it was really an elaborate mechanism of keeping Black people behind. And so, and it affected white people too, because a lot of these landlords would go into communities and they would tell white families, there's some Blacks moving here in the neighborhood, you better move because you're going to lose all your equity in your house. And so the white families would move, and then that landlord would buy that home and then resell it, sometimes at triple cost, to a Black family. And the Black family is signing paperwork, not understanding that they're not signing a mortgage. What's key to remember is mortgage, every time you make a payment, you're building equity in that home, money. But they're signing these contracts, these covenants. It's not a mortgage. They're never building on equity, and they're paying triple what that home is worth. And you'll learn about a family like the Boldens who signed one of these contracts. They made their payments. They were late one time, and the landlord sent an eviction notice. They ended up getting an attorney. They tried to fight it, but in the end, they lost. And this happened to hundreds, thousands of families in Chicago, but really across the country.
They said, I think in that first episode, that there was like over 200, maybe 250 banks, and they're out of all the banks that were lending, only one Black family had received a mortgage at that time. And
82% of the Black families in Chicago were all on a land contract, not a mortgage contract. 82%.
Wow.
And they didn't know it. They didn't realize it until an attorney, once, like she mentioned, that particular family, once they were going to be evicted, they went and sought legal counsel, and that attorney started looking at everything and said, this isn't a mortgage. And so they
Yep.
had no idea that that's what they were signing. But like Aisha said, it hurt white families as well, because the individual, they called him a speculator. The speculator would come and talk to that white family and scare them and say, leave. And that white family, maybe their home was worth $15,000. The speculator would say, because, you know, they're moving in, it's going to devalue your property. You got to sell your property for $14,000. So then they were losing their money in their home as well, along with the black family that is obviously paying too much for based on the up costs, because they were also having to pay for repairs, taxes, insurance, and the contract was already asking for more than a normal mortgage. So many of the times, all of their income was going to that contract, and it was predatory because
Yeah.
they knew as soon as they missed that payment, they would be able to take over that house and sell it to someone else. So it was like a property they could gain a lot of money from, and that individual lost all their investment, right?
Yes. Wow. Wow. So both of you guys, you're in the Metro Human Relations, modern day, Fort Wayne Urban League, modern day. When I hear about stuff like this, is there can this be tied into modern day? I mean, do you see the
yes.
ripple effect of what happened then? I mean, like right now? Can
Well,
you
we
get
haven't
people-
recovered. I mean, we have not recovered. And when you look at the data, we're really right back to where we were in the 1960s. When I pulled up the Census Bureau, and this was going off the fourth quarter of 2023, 73.8% of white Americans own their home compared to 45.9% of black Americans. That's modern day. And so we have not recovered. And every time that we think we're about to, something else happens. So we're talking about shame of Chicago. We're talking about redlining, banks not, creating mortgages for black people. But look at 2008. We forget about 2008, but that wasn't too long ago when we had the housing crisis. And why? Who was affected by that? It was black families, put into mortgages that were predatory as well. And we had thousands of families losing those homes, and we haven't recovered. Modern day now, we have the student loan crisis that is affecting, a lot of families, particularly black and brown families, from buying homes. Because what we found is during the pandemic, when student loans were put on pause, we had an uptick in black families buying homes. I mean, it's so connected. And now that has been released and they're open again, now the numbers are going right back down. So we haven't recovered, and we haven't learned from history not to recreate it. The very same systems that are keeping black and whites so far, blacks behind when we're comparing the data to white families and white communities.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think, like you said, there's about a 30% gap in mortgages between black individuals and white individuals, but we still see there's still a small gap between Latinos and Asian Americans as well. I think it's about 10% and 12%, give or take. So we still see that there's that wealth gap, but then we also see that there's new mechanisms for discrimination that are occurring. It's not the old, exactly like what we see in the 1950s, but there's new ways. I'm not sure if you've heard of appraisal discrimination that is happening, right? So where I think there was a case
in Indy.
Her name, her last name was Duffy. Miss Duffy went to sell her home. I think she had things that would disclose that she is a black individual, like artwork and things of that nature, pictures of her family. And when she got that home appraised, it appraised lower than what she was expecting. So she thought, that's interesting. She ended up getting appraised by a couple companies, and it was still not where she thought. And so what she ended up doing is she ended up taking all of that down, and she had a friend sit in for her who was a white individual. I believe it was a friend. And they had it appraised again, and all of a sudden the value went up. And so you're seeing a lot more of the appraisal discrimination that is happening, as well as there's still predatory contract loans, right? So we're talking in the 1917, 1920s, we're talking about these contracts that we see in episode 1, but you still have predatory contracts. The Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana actually took a case in Indianapolis against Rainbow Realties. In 2022, they ended up settling that case for, I think, $750,000 plus, because they realized that company was using the old tricks of contract contracts, rent to own contracts, going into predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, saying, hey, we can get you into this contract. But it was a contract with bad terms where if they missed a payment, they would lose everything. The exact same that we've seen, 100 years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. Yeah, folks, the lenders are making money on top of money. So I mean, it's a no-win situation for them, or a win situation for them, because you're right, putting people in bad contracts. You failed. Now I'm gonna put somebody else in the same bad contract, and the house is paid for over and over. And then there are stories though where families have persevered under these bad contracts and still end up becoming homeowners, but they paid 6 times more than what the house is worth. And I mean, it's just speaks to the perseverance that a lot of families and had to take the terms that were dealt to them back then.
Well,
Yeah.
because there's so much pride in home ownership, and we call it the American dream, but there's pride in that because our lives are tied to our home. That's where we bring our babies home. That's where we celebrate Christmas. That's where we have the cookouts. And so for many people, having that American dream means in order to have the foundations, I've got to have that home, right? So there's that pride there. And so what we find even in the documentary is people are willing to risk it all, to give their family that foundation, only to be tricked. And really having the rug pulled out from under them because they'll never own that home. And one thing that I found interesting too, when you research, is one of the reasons why it was hard to fight at first is because a lot of Black families wouldn't admit that they weren't homeowners, that they were signing these land contracts. Why? Because it's back to that pride.
It is pride. They called it aversion,
Yes. Yes.
where they didn't want people to know until
No.
one woman at
One
an open
woman.
meeting
One
said,
woman.
hey, I was taken by this. And then
Yeah.
that everyone felt vulnerable. Like,
Yes.
okay, I can talk about this because there was a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We're saying, how all these things happen, but what we see is that they were able to come together. They were able to talk about these things. They were able to get out. There were helpers, right? They were able to get outside counsel and people that helped them through this process. And they ended up saying, if you try to evict us, we're not leaving our house. And they literally sat there and the people that came in were going to move their stuffs out and put it on the lawn. Everyone on their team came back and put it back in the home, and they would not leave until eventually the banks and the speculators and all of that it was really the banks, because I guess the speculators, they said they were like modern day pirates. They didn't care, and they didn't care what the reputation was. But the banks were like, no, we have to try to fix this. So a lot of them ended up, because of that movement, being able to renegotiate the terms of that contract. But old tricks die hard, right? We are still seeing things like that as recent as 2022 here in Indiana.
Yeah, gotcha. And it's funny because, I think I've asked you guys offset. I said, there are people out there that says this stuff didn't exist, and people are responsible for their own circumstances and don't understand that mechanism been put in place to put people where they're at. But as a lender, yes, there are regulations, and banks get in trouble when they find out that you have some of these discriminatory practices. So like you said, I know you guys have the numbers. The numbers are out there for anybody to see for banks that or lenders that have done some things that haven't been up to par or been downright illegal. You touched on the wealth gap and student loans. And I love it because that's the one thing, when I go out and I talk to people and I tell them the number one thing that's responsible for the gap that exists is home ownership. And then if you want to get off into further detail, is the GI Bill. People went off and fought in wars and came back by the millions. The dominant race was able to go to college for free, get the home ownership, at discounted rates. And Black soldiers weren't afforded the same opportunity. So when you talk about student loan, here these folks got to go to school for free, get a career and earn a living, got their house at a discounted rate. So now this home has been in the family for years. It's paid off. That's just the bank that now they're paying for their kids to go to college, and their kids are paying for their kids to go to college. And it's a continuous process where African Americans weren't afforded that same advantage. So
No. And because we're behind by not owning our homes, I mean, when you look at current data, Blacks have a wealth of about $1,000. a black family compared to $117,000 worth of wealth to a white family of similar size. What's making that difference? I mean, that's $116,000 difference. The white family owns their home. There's equity in that home. The black family does not own a home. There's no equity building. And that's today, So, yes. And I think it's the history that's so important. You ask, why do we do this? Why are we partnering? We can't forget. I think it's our duty to remind people of the history, where we come from, so that we can work on solutions. If we act like there's no problem, then we're never bringing solution to the table. And that's really, what we have to do to make change.
Definitely. But you guys know the climate of our society today. There's going to be pushback. And there's people that say, "Oh, we don't need it. That didn't happen. And what does that have to do with me now?" Times have changed. Blacks can live wherever they want to live. I mean, how do you combat those discussions and people that are closed-minded and don't want to look at the facts, or they think the facts are a lie or made up?
I'm sure Nikki has a great answer, but I will just say, look at the data. I mean, if you look at the Oxford neighborhood, it's 79% African American. Why?
Yeah. You can look at the maps.
I mean, look at the maps.
You could put the maps. And
Yes.
Sarah Pratt actually came to our fair house. She actually used to work for HUD. She was high up in HUD, and she worked for a big firm in DC. And we ended up being able to bring her to Fair Housing Summit. And she actually did a whole session on this. And she brought the maps and showed this was the redlining maps, and then this is what your city looks like today. And it literally follows that map, right? So where the black and people of color, where they live in Fort Wayne. So we still have a segregated city today. And that is the country in general. You will see that same pattern.
But we created underserved communities because of redlining, because of these practices. So we created it, and then we blame the people who we created this community for all the trouble of why they're not able to get ahead, which, it's so unfair. I don't know what else you would call it, because when we look at underserved communities, it's not just people not owning their home and building equity. There's so many other things that go into it. Access to health care. We're always talking about food deserts and this, and it still exists because these communities really were created. And we haven't done a very good job of working people out of those communities into better situations so that they are building wealth for their families.
You said it, like housing is the key to the quality of life that you have. Well, where you live is going to determine where you work, what kind of food you eat, where you go to school, what kind of opportunities that you have, your health. It affects all of that. And so we do still see the disparities today. And when someone says, well, that's them, that's not me, I'm living in my silo, I also want to make sure everyone understands that the reality is discrimination costs everyone. It costs everyone, even if they don't see that they're being directly impacted. When someone is living somewhere where they don't have good housing, or they end up in an emergency room, there's more policing, all of these costs, that goes on to the taxpayer, and we're all taxpayers.
Yes.
Right? So it costs everyone.
That's exactly right. And an excellent perspective, because I say it often without calling anybody out, but there's certain neighborhoods, you're right, people, they don't leave their section of town. So therefore, even in Fort Wayne, and we're not that big, but there's people, I don't leave my section of town. Everything is hunky-dory in my world. And I look on the news, Oxford Street, Hannah, Pontiac, all that might as well be, a million miles away, because it's not in my backyard. And it's just, look at those people versus everything that you guys just said. How can I build up, that community, or help and assist that community? I always use the adage, we're only as strong as our weakest community, and that's, everybody should be in it together. But we, as you know, again, I don't have to tell you guys that's not always the case. But Fort Wayne, I always said, let's step out, let's be different. And I love the fact that you guys are bringing this, here, and can educate folks, because a lot of times people, they don't know, because like I said, it's just not their world. It's outside of their purview. So therefore,
but so many people are going to be able to relate to the series, because it's going to be hard to find a black or brown person that doesn't have a personal story. I know of a family that, we grew up with that rented their home for 30 years. And then when that grandmother died, that home went back to the landlord.
Mm-hmm.
That family never owned that home. We
Mm-hmm.
thought they owned it because they'd been there 30 years plus. They had draperies,
Mm.
specifically made for the windows. And it
Wow.
was, pretty and clean. And you thought, wow, they own it. But when the grandma died, that's when it came out. They were still paying a landlord. They had been paying a landlord since the family migrated from Alabama to Fort Wayne, never owned the home.
Wow.
So you see this, and
Mm-hmm.
it affects our own communities, our own families. And so it's difficult to watch the series, and not be filled with, you're angry, but there's sadness in it too.
There's definitely sadness, and it is very educate. You get educated. It makes you uncomfortable. You'll probably be uncomfortable if you come a little bit because you're seeing this all. It's taking you back, but I think there's also that light at the end of the tunnel, and I always try to find that in everything that I do, where you see these individuals, the community, black, white, all backgrounds, still come together, still advocate, still find ways to make change. I mean, in the series, at the end, you'll see how they were able to push to get the home disclosure, or the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, so that they could fight back on redlining for the banks that were saying that they weren't doing it. Now they had the data to push back on that, and the Community Reinvestment Act that we know is still that was still doing work to this day. So they were able to come together and create positive change. But it does start by having the discussions. Why we want to continue to bring awareness, continue to educate, so that we can have these discussions, and then we can come to the table and say, what can we do? Because we do have good organizations and good partners out in the community who are doing great work. I would be remiss in saying that the Office of Housing and Neighborhood Services is also partnering with
Oh,
us
yes.
on this. So I do want to make sure I mention them and the city of Fort Wayne. So we are going to hear kind of what the city, at that panel discussion, we're going to hear what the city is doing, what Habitat for Humanity is doing, what Midwest America is doing, what Linda's doing with her business, and how we can use that to make some change moving forward, even if it's little step by step, but we still have to keep working in that
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. I love that story. We talk about the folks that own the house, and you guys thought that they owned it, but they were renting. In people's ignorance, I know when we had the election, and there was talks of down payment assistance, and I heard some intelligent people saying, "Down payment assistance? Why would you give people money to buy a house? They can't afford it." And I kind of chuckled to myself and had to educated people. And I said, "Do
Hmm.
you understand?" I said, owning a home is cheaper than renting in most cases.
Yep. Uh-huh.
The only hurdle is that down payment. I
Yeah.
said, so if we can get them assistance with that down payment, I said, you get folks in the house. I said, there's people that have been renting for 30 years, 40 years.
Yes.
That example you just gave
Mm-hmm.
have been great tenants, haven't missed a payment.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so now think about it. We can make them homeowners. All, if you get over that hurdle. So it is. It's just a lot of ignorance and just misnomers. And so when we have discussions like this, and everybody that you mentioned, I love it because shout out to Kelly Lundberg and Office of Neighborhood, Linda and Rainey. I'm a member of all these organizations, Housing Authority. They have to bring in and educate landlords because people, how they view people with Section 8 and all this that the other, not understanding that 9 times out of 10 they're going to be your best tenants.
And it's guaranteed money.
Guaranteed money with additional resources and assistance.
Yes.
So you bring folks in. So now, people are starting to understand that. But I just think it's going to take a continued effort. And, like I said, everything that you guys do, I definitely appreciate. And, us here at ONB and our whole thing and trying to, bring the Southeast side back to prominence. These are all discussions that need to be had. And,
Yeah,
we
well, and it's a
appreciate you guys.
big piece of the justice puzzle. So when you look at justice, you can't work at justice and make that your life's work and not ever talk about how economics fits into that. And if we remember history, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King did awesome work through the civil rights movement, that passing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, remember how excited we were about that. But what he learned in his final years was that I've got to start focusing on economics because these passages didn't cost the country anything. It didn't cost us anything to sign a bill to make voting rights, applicable, but it's going to cost something when you look at home ownership and things like that. And he visited Chicago, a slum of Chicago, that year that he died, and couldn't believe the living conditions. And you know what leaders were telling him? You focus on civil rights, get out of here. We got this. We know how to handle this. And he died really from a broken heart because he was getting so much hate from people by trying to pivot and say, okay, we've made some movement in civil rights here, but we really have to start focusing on economics. And he got so much pushback. One of the slums that he was visiting in Chicago, there was no heat in the dead of winter. So imagine a cold day like this. They were wrapping babies up in newspaper. And so he and his team, Andrew Young, they're getting enough coal, they get the furnaces going, but they had to do that to even be able to talk to the people. You can't talk to people and they're freezing to death, but it just shows you how, even in today's world, how that history just keeps repeating itself. We've made some movement towards civil rights. We've lost a lot of ground here recently, especially for Black and brown people living in this country, but we haven't done a whole lot of repairing the damage so then that we can move forward. We just keep repeating and creating more damage. And that's really has to stop.
Okay, perfect. Now, we've come up against it. And I'll tell you how quick it was going to go.
Dude, it went really fast.
Yes, tell you how quick it's going to go. Go ahead, give us a recap. Let the folks know again, each Wednesday, I'll let you guys, give you guys the honor of recapping the events as well as what you have going on your Monday. So go ahead. And,
my recap for Monday is Monday 2nd. Mayor Tucker has signed a proclamation making Monday John Knuckles Day, who we know was the first African American to be appointed to City Council. We're going to read that proclamation. Fort Wayne Urban League will also be kicking off our 3rd year with the Race Card Project. So you'll find out information about that, but it's open and free to the public. Come out, kick off your Black History Month, acknowledging a man in this community who really fought hard for justice issues with Black and brown folks. And so we're going to honor John Knuckles that day. Come on out to Fort Wayne Urban League, 10:30 Monday.
All righty, 10:30 Monday, Fort Wayne Urban League. Nikki?
And then we have the February Fair Housing Series, which will be every Wednesday in February, which is February 4th, 11th, 18th, and 25th. The first 3 Wednesdays, it's from 5:30 to 6:30. And then the last Wednesday, which is the one I really do not want anyone to miss, is the panel discussion where we'll have Mayor Sharon Tucker again, Linda Golden with Rainey, Melissa McCown with the CEO of Habitat for Humanity, and as well as Tamisha Fikes with Midwest America Federal Credit Union, who is the sponsor of this event.
All righty, perfect. You guys heard it. Excellent discussion. You see the passion in these two voices. Come on out, support them that Wednesday. I'll be out there. I'll be in attendance. And actually, hopefully, each Thursday following their series on Wednesday, we'll come on and we can kind of recap what was talked about the night before. So tune in for that. But again, pleasure having you guys on.
Thank
like
you.
I said,
Thank
you guys
you.
see why they're two of my favorite, because again, not only are they the most intelligent that you're going to find, you see the passion that they bring, very knowledgeable. So anything they care about this community, been doing good work here for a long time. So until next time, I'm your host, JJ Foster, Fort Wayne Up Close, and we are out ONB.